Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of trying to code a complete dungeon crawl in 25 days. This is day 3 of the 25-day challenge. So in my last video, I introduced this challenge and I introduced my list of what I considered to be the minimum requirements for a dungeon crawl. I got about halfway through that. In this video, I'd like to continue reading through that list. So the first item on my list is fleeing and being chased. So the last thing that I spoke about in the previous video was monster morale. That is, the monsters will not mindlessly fight to the death. Instead, if things are going badly, they will run away, try to negotiate, surrender, take some sort of action to avoid dying. Similarly, the player characters shouldn't have to fight to the death. They should have the option of, among other things, running away. And then it may be that the enemies chase them, it may be that they don't, it may be that the characters end up lost. These are mechanisms that a lot of dungeon crawl games seem not to have, but they seem to me to be interesting and I want to have them. Next thing, and this is something that I've gotten from a couple of other game rules that aren't dungeon crawls that I've looked at, one of which I looked at on this channel, the board game Source of the Nile, which is about exploring Africa during the 19th century. I want to give players the option to move fast, medium or slow, and for that to have different game effects. For example, if you're moving quickly, you're more likely to be ambushed. And I've made a note here that says time limit in dungeon based on torches, for example. So what I mean by that is that there is a time limit on how long you can go into the dungeon in a single expedition, and that might be based on the fact that you have a certain amount of fuel for torches and you have to get out before your torches run out. So therefore there's an incentive to move quickly and therefore explore more of the dungeon and therefore hopefully end up with more treasure. But that has mechanical effects. The next item, XP, standing for experience points, and leveling up. This is a mechanic that I'm sure you're familiar with. The characters get experience, and a certain amount of experience triggers a new level for the character, meaning that they get more effectiveness. So a wizard might get access to more spells, a warrior would presumably be better at combat. I've made the note XP for treasure, meaning that the characters don't get experience for winning fights with monsters, which is probably the more usual way to do it, but they get experience for how much treasure they manage to take out of the dungeon. That's to encourage a stealthier playstyle or a cleverer playstyle, a playstyle of not attacking everything, but weighing the benefits of each potential conflict. Magic items, which can be sold or used, well, that's pretty straightforward. Variety of monsters, again, that's pretty straightforward. The dungeon is three-dimensional. Encounters on lower levels are harder. This is a convention of dungeon crawls that you're probably all familiar with. It allows the player to have some control over how much danger they put themselves in. I didn't write this, but should have, that encounters on lower levels are also more rewarding on average. There's more treasure, but there's more danger. And finally, leaving the dungeon has a cost. For example, less treasure equals people leave the party. So this is a consequence of the fact that the players in games like this often have resources which are used up as they explore the dungeon and are renewed by leaving the dungeon. So the typical example is spells. The characters have a certain amount of spells that they can cast. Once they cast spells, they have to leave the dungeon and relearn their spells in the fiction of the game, rest up, get their hit points back, and so on. And that creates an obvious question, which is, well, why don't you just go into the dungeon, use up all your spells as quickly as possible, and then leave as soon as you've done that? And so there has to be some mechanic which makes you not want to do that, makes you not want to leave. And the answer that I have is that there's a cost to leaving the dungeon. If you leave the dungeon with little treasure per character, then the people that you've hired start to think that you're a bad employer or you're unlucky or whatever it may be, and they will leave you and you find it harder to get new people. That is the entire list. I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.